This is The Extra Mile.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Caleb Spear along with
G5.
the G5, who's about to be out of town for a bit. We got baby George and Paige coming along, but not G6.
Not G6, but another, I'm sure, a beautiful girl. And so you'll have more of Caleb to deal with.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
I'm sorry for
But
you.
and speaking of the ladies, we have a guest with us today. We've got Kassie Williamson. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on, taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. So as we get rolling, as you guys know, we like to do some testimonies where we hear about how people found Christ. Everyone's got a unique personal story that they have and how God saved them.
That's
and
right.
we want to hear all about it. So as we get rolling along here, we're just going to let you take the floor, and we might interject here and
right.
and ask a question here or there. But, I mean, I guess just to start, how would you sum up your story on how you found Christ?
Well, I guess I'll start with the beginning, obviously.
A good place.
Yeah. So I grew up kind of in a household of on-again, off-again Christians.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would go to church when my family had time to go to church.
Mhm.
And it was only on Sunday mornings. So it was never a consistent thing. I grew up with my mother, brother, and we lived with my grandparents.
Okay.
And my grandparents were the strong influence, but again, they worked a lot, so it was never enforced on me. So they did get me enrolled in a Bible church camp, Camp Blue
nice.
Haven, I think. Went there when I was 11, and where I was baptized for the first time. Looking back on it now, I think it was for all the wrong reasons. It was just peer pressure and just
That
didn't
happens a lot
yeah.
at
Yeah.
those camp environments.
The
It does.
intention I hear is always nice, and the experience, it seems, is always nice. But like you're saying, it's kind of like this crowd mentality, like, oh, they're getting it baptized, I should get baptized as well.
Yeah. And that doesn't, I know there are some people who really did it for the right reasons too.
Oh, I'm sure.
But a lot of people, like we're talking about, you just get swept away in it.
Yeah.
So you were
Yeah.
baptized, you said 11
Yes.
is when you, and then what were the next stages after that?
So after that, we kind of started going to church more and trying to be more involved. I actually met some members from this congregation who became good friends. We ended up, they helped me a little bit more to be more involved, and which was good. And then after a while, I fell off the wagon, I guess it'd be a term.
Yeah.
Bad term, but
Is
ended
this
up
like
going my own way.
high school days now? what
Yeah,
we're
high
talking
school
about?
days now, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And going my own way and following a bad path. Got involved in alcohol, drugs, and
Yeah.
just kind of fell into the world, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say it was a lot of peer pressure, or were there influences outside?
Just stress or.
Well, about that time when it first started was when my father died.
Okay.
I didn't really have a good connection with him. My parents divorced when I was 2, so he was never really around. And when he died, I just kind of lost that chance to connect with him, if I were to connect.
Right.
And so I think that kind of started
Now,
everything on that path.
how old were you when he passed away?
I was 14.
Yeah, that's pretty young.
That's really hard to lose someone like that.
Yeah. Okay, so 14, your father passed away, and that was part of a lot of things in your environment that were really hitting you hard. And then, so was it around after that time that you started diving off into the worldly living?
Yes.
Yeah. So, how many? I'm not reveling in it, but just how many years would you say that was an issue for you?
Oh, goodness. Probably anywhere from 7 to 10 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. 7 to 10 years, and then what? I guess. How do I want to ask this? What was at least the beginning of the turning point? Do you think where you started waking up again, so to say?
I I guess after just constantly living that way and just feeling like there's got to be something more, something different, better even. So just, I remember waking up one morning and just, I need a change. I want something different. And it happened to be on a Sunday. So I ended up coming back to this congregation, and it's always been here, and I knew who to reach out to.
Yeah.
So
I'm very intrigued by what you said when you said, correct me if I'm misstating or misunderstanding, that there was something better. Like usually we hear buzz and we have a negative reaction, like you're talking right now with drugs and alcohol. Or we talk about buzz driving, that kind of thing. But there's a better buzz than these things. Is that kind of like what you're talking about? Like there's something more than, like, what did you mean by that?
I wouldn't say a buzz, more just a better way of living.
Yeah.
A passage that kind of came to mind, I think might tie some of this together, this is one of the Psalms I'm doing next week, but Psalm 107, look at verses 4 through 9 if you want. But it says, some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. And then this is always a key. I think every one of us have been in this point where there's this breaking point, and they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he, and this is really key, I think, for he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. And that's something we all need.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Is that kind of the idea
Yes.
you're looking at?
Yeah.
That amazes me, and you've experienced it, and we've all experienced those ways, whether it was ourselves or someone close that we know that fell on this, or it doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. There's more than one way to fall off the wagon. There's a lot of different ways. But if we're not spirit-filled, if I'm not, in Christ, if God's not my, like you were reading in Psalm 107, my satisfaction, I'm always going to be looking for the earthly buzz, like whatever it is. Like you just said, it doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. It can be whatever it is. It can be, money. I talked about that in a sermon recently. It can be whatever it is. But those things, those cravings, I guess you're experiencing, came every day. It just stayed around. So you don't have to give names or whatnot. Probably more interested in the content. Obviously, you can if you want. But these people, when you came back to the congregation, when you were thinking, there's something more than this, there's something like we read that satisfies, how were you discipled and loved? Like, what were the influences that showed you were loved and who were kind of helping you out? What was that like?
I think the main influences would be my aunt and uncle. They've started here when I first started coming here when I was in middle school, when I was introduced to the congregation. And they've always been here, so
Nice.
They've been that influence for me.
So as someone who it sounds kind of like, very well, the Luke 15, what's the term? Prodigal son.
Yeah.
It sounds very, very much so like that story. So as the prodigal son or the prodigal daughter here, the prodigal daughter come back to the King of Kings, how, because you've experienced as the one being that prodigal kid, so to say, how can those in the church, like with your aunt and uncle, how can we be accepting and loving? What were some things that knew you were loved without compromising the sin? It's like, how can we do that when it comes to welcoming people back into the fold?
I guess just like be open, just welcome them in. Don't judge them or bring up whatever they've done in the past. Just kind of let it go. If they're ready to talk about it with you, they'll talk about it. But just kind of pray for them and just say, hey, welcome back. Come hang out with us, do this, or do a study here.
That's really nice. Forgiveness is what comes to mind.
That's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
Very.
In thinking of forgiveness, let's save that for one more minute and kind of wrap up like your story here, though, because we're a classic Caleb interrupting himself. But You said you were baptized at 11, but you said it didn't feel, looking back, it wasn't for the right reasons. It wasn't genuine. We use the term very often, rebaptized. I understand that there's one baptism, like Ephesians 4. I get that. But so now, when were you so to say, when were you actually baptized? When did that happen? What's that story?
That actually happened a couple years ago.
Okay.
I started coming back to the congregation and being more involved in the church. Sundays, both morning, evening, Wednesdays, young adult studies. I just dove right in.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which was great. And then after a couple of years, I started hearing the same passage, Luke 15, for like over the next 3 months before I was rebaptized. And just, it kind of hit home for me. It's like, okay, I feel like I need to do this. So I met with a couple of people, my uncle included, and just like, I'm thinking about getting rebaptized. What do I need to do? Like, what are the steps?
Yeah.
And just, because at the time, I didn't feel ready. I felt like I needed to fix myself first and change my habits and just be a better Christian, I guess, or that better model. Instead of continuing with the drugs and alcohol, and because I was still taking part in that, but I felt like it was something that I needed to just stop doing before I could get baptized.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That makes sense. It's almost like we gotta clean ourselves before we can, be with God. But we forget sometimes. I think we've all fallen in this where God is the one that cleanses us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. Because the only way any of this could have happened is with, God. And there are some people who, I know some people who have defeated addictions and things like that without God. Like they don't believe in God or whatever.
Sure.
And they defeat it. But then their life, they defeat one thing, and now their life is encapsulated by another. And that's what's really weird to me is that the same person, we always categorize, I'm sure you felt this, categorize the sins in the sense of, like there's this group over here that do these things that's worse than everyone else. But then the person who may never profess God or never live for God and just lives, your standard, good guy life, so to say, right? That person's not right with God either.
No.
Because we forget that everything we do, God's glory is so valuable and infinite. We miss that all the time, that even without it, it's like, well, I'm a good person. And we realize, really, though, is that actually the case? Yeah.
We're relying on deeds, our own deeds at that point.
Right, relying on our own deeds. So this prodigal, you really have a connection to Luke 15, it sounds like.
I do.
Yeah, that's the connection. So you'd mentioned that the people who welcomed you back, it wasn't bringing up the past again, as you said, forgiving. And then did you mention anything about listening? Did you say that? Or like, where did you feel?
They did. They listened. And really, there was a lot of other members of the congregation that, knew me growing up. And, they never brought up anything from my past. Just kind of, hey, how are you doing? And trying to catch up. And they invited me out for lunches and studies and just listening. And when I was ready to come clean about everything, they were there and they did not judge me.
Right.
So it was nice.
Yeah, if we hung on to everyone's past, everyone's damned. What kind of salvation is that?
Yeah.
That ain't grace.
No, it's not.
That would not be grace at all.
I think that's the beauty, especially when you compare, the church, God's kingdom, His people, to people like, what we see today, media, modern media, and how they judge people and they shame people, and there's no forgiveness. But the beauty of God's creation as, His kingdom and the people that serve Him is that we're able to come in as a family and not shame people. But
and in the world, it's also religion too.
Yeah.
Other religions, it's works based.
Yeah.
Like you're done in the other religions. You're just totally works based. So a lot of lessons there. So you've commit your life to Christ now. It's genuine. You're there. God's empowered you to clean up all the stuff. But now walking the walk doesn't, just because you become a Christian doesn't mean all the trials are done and
No.
whatnot. Yeah, as you attesting to, not only our own temptations, but those around us. Mm-hmm. So were there any people around in your life who were, not supportive or on board the fact that you'd become a Christian? Was there anything like that?
Yes, there was a lot, because I had just become a Christian and I was really trying to walk the walk, as you say.
Yeah.
But I had surrounded myself over the years with unchristian people. So it just, and some of them were supportive because, they believe in a higher power. They were very spiritual people, but not Christians. Mm-hmm. And so, and I've got some family that I was surrounded with that were Christians, but they were Baptists or some other form of religion. And so when I come clean and it's like, hey, I was baptized, I can't drink that anymore, or I don't want to do that, and oh, you're one of those, and basically shunned out of the group.
Even the self-professed Christians had that reaction?
There were some of them. They were just like, okay, yeah, that's okay, we understand, but they were just kind of.
But you had friends and family who were living ungodly lives who were just kind of like, their reaction was like, why? Or like, what was their reaction? How was it?
Well, they were just like, okay, good. We're proud of you for doing that decision for yourself. And and then there were some that just, okay, whatever.
But the influence was, you can still do the same things we're doing? Mm-hmm. Or
Yeah, you can still do this. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you can't do this. And it's like, no, I don't think that's right.
So I thought we had a question that someone put in the box that we have out in the lobby, that kind of along these lines with your testimony now, your life right now. They're like, well, how do I engage with not only unbelievers but ungodly, like really, riotous living, I guess you'd say. How do we do with ungodly friends and then even family or parents? Like, that was an interesting question. So when it came to your friends and family around you who were not godly influences, what are some ways you think that you've been able to handle them and whatnot when it comes to those influences?
Well, I think that at first, just coming clean, this is my life now. This is what I'm going to do. And, I don't want to be a part of y'all's activities and whatever. They've just kind of like, okay, whatever, that's fine. And, eventually I just kind of stopped seeing them because they just kept pushing it onto me unknowingly, I guess.
Right.
Just, hey, you can still do this. Hey, come join us for this drink or something. And
unhealthy environment.
Yes.
Yeah, could lead to other consequences that could spiral, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, just pull you back into it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It was specifically sexual immorality, but Paul said for that, flee. Run from it. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, make no mistake, he was like, bad company will corrupt good morals. It's actually, I've seen it in my life too, I'm sure you've seen it as well, it sounds like, is hidden pride in ourselves when we're like, I can handle it.
Yeah.
When I get in the group and I'm in this environment, again, not just drugs and alcohol, whatever else it may be, I get in this environment and it's like, oh, I can deal with it. And we set the bar so low, the bar becomes, well, I'm technically not sinning if I'm not but I'm still here, which at least is is God being glorified?
Yeah.
Do they know? Am I the light? Because I like what you said, where you're like, I let them know. That's such an important first step with dealing with ungodly family, whether it's parents or it's ungodly friends, to be upfront and honest with it. I mean, it sounds like the little kid song I love so much. This little light of mine, hiding under a bushel, and the kids are like, no, yell really loud.
Emmy gets into that so much. It's like
a bright light. Now, the hard thing is some of those people, family and friends, I'd imagine you still care about. And so in that relationship, now what? So what have you been trying to do with them? Because I understand we can't be a part of sin, but how's your relationship going now with those?
Well, some of them I don't talk to but once in a while and just kind of catch up. And, at first they started saying, we need to start going to church again. we need to start doing this more.
Mm-hmm.
And they would start doing it, but then they'd fall right back into their worldly things, and just
It wasn't deep enough.
it
maybe.
wasn't. No,
Yeah.
So it's definitely different for every person, and God's
Yeah.
going to work differently in every life. But for you, just for Kassie, what's the difference between you and them? What happened there? Like what was that allowed you to truly give those things up and really commit your life? What was it? The love that you felt like? That was it? The support? What worked for you? What allowed you to keep walking the walk?
It was definitely the love and the support that I got
okay.
from the congregation, and sometimes it came to a point where they felt more like family to me than my own family. Which, after a while, my grandparents started coming to church more with me as well, and then my mother, who I didn't realize wasn't a Christian, became a Christian.
That's great.
Under that influence. So, just.
Now, were you having conversations with her? Or like, how did that unfold with your mom becoming a disciple?
We had conversations. I think it was more of her parents having the stronger influence, and having more conversations with her and trying to influence her to come more and be more involved. Honestly, God's grace. I honestly don't know.
I mean, ultimately, you're so right.
So
that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yes.
But all it started before the conversations and all that was just your changed life. Like we talk about, we use the word a lot in this podcast, apologetics, and it ends up getting into archaeology and all this other stuff, and that's useful in its time and place. But just the most clear and wonderful apologetic is the changed life.
Just being that example.
Yeah, because even for you, there'd be no testimony. It wouldn't negate that God's not out there, but it would negate that the Spirit of God's not there if people were not willing to be there with open arms and say, we forgive and we want to support.
Yeah.
Huge, huge deal.
That is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I think when a congregation or a local body, when members of God's kingdom can mimic that steadfast love that God has for us and bring it out in the people and the relationships that they have and that they connect with, it really makes an impact on people's lives. It reminds us of God's steadfast love and what really saved us, and we can see that steadfast love. I love the idea of a husband and wife. How do I know I really love this person? Or they'll ask that question often, and there's just this sense of peace when you're with that person. And it's not that that person, or we're not going to have hard times or troubles, but the sense of peace that I'm with this person, and life is so much better with this person, and I would not be better on my own. That I get this sense of peace, and that same thing is just tenfold when we are with God and we have a relationship with God and we know God and we have this sense of peace. Not that our life won't have any troubles, but that this comfort that is with us, that, hey, I am with God and I have a relationship with God, and we can see his steadfast love in the works he does in our lives. And it's a beautiful imagery that is played out.
Yeah, if the church is not a family, no one's going to come out of anything.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just a bunch of individuals who gather in a room 3 times a week, no, we're not going to hear these stories.
Right.
We're not going to have people saved and brought to truth,
Right.
brought to Jesus.
Right.
So now, in the day-to-day life with those people, are you praying for them, or what's going on now with those relationships? We kind of detoured, classic. But with those people, now what? How are you trying to be an influence on those who are lost, with your mom?
So just continue to pray for them. Every once in a while I'll invite them over, and occasionally, when there's a quiet moment and they're busy with their kids, I'll either sit and read my Bible or just, I'll always have Christian music playing in my house, always. And as much as it annoys them sometimes, but it helps lift me up and inspire me.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like it's helped inspire my mom a little bit.
Yeah.
Just seeing me read my Bible, seeing me pray, hearing all the songs that I listen to, and just I feel like that kind of helped inspire her. And so I keep doing that and trying to do more.
Did that inspire conversation as well?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. A lot of people think they have this idea, whether it's family, friend, whatever these close relationships are, that it's like some miniature sermon that they have to give us kind of work.
No.
And no. You're telling us, no, it was the life I lived. They saw a change, and I wasn't given over to these things. I was in love with God, and they see me with my friends in church and read my Bible. And then it did open up the door for those little bits of conversations to happen. It wasn't some sermon. It was
practicing your faith.
All of you need to repent. Like that's just not how it works.
No.
That's not
It was
how it
practicing your faith.
goes. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And putting that into practice.
And I love how you said, I was just asking questions. You're like, yeah, I am praying for those who are lost. Think about your aunt and uncle. Think about those at this church and others who were Christians who were praying for you when you were out living the prodigal son or prodigal daughter life.
Yeah.
I had a few thoughts, like, so kind of twofold here. We had that question that someone submitted, which was, hey, how do we treat ungodly parents, family, friends? What do we do with that? That's hard, like the influences you're talking about. And then another thing that you've just brought to my attention here is, how do we welcome back people who really want to come back to God, who've lived whatever prodigal type of living? And I think the answer could be summed up, and like we were talking about, in praying and in forgiving, and those two. What were you going to say, George?
I'm just going to go back to the prodigal son.
Oh, nice.
And verse 20, even though that is, I think it's one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible, if not probably my favorite. And it's a great picture of God and his people, but it's also a picture of a family, a father and a son. And when we tie that in our own family and trying to connect with our own family, practicing our faith and being an influence in our own family, it's a great picture of how we should handle not only them, but also invite them back. And in verse 20, it says, so he got up and went to his father. He's realized now, there's a problem. But while he was still a long way from home, his father saw him, and his heart went out to him. That's key. His heart went out to him. His heart would not have gone out to him if he wasn't praying for him, thinking about him, worried about him, caring about him, wondering what he's doing. But his heart went out to him, and he ran and hugged his son and kissed him. And we all know what happened, right? The son admits his faults, and the father ignores, what he's going to do. I can be a servant, and just embraces him. And like you were saying, when when you were finding family with God's people, they embraced you with forgiveness. And when the second son, his brother, wanted to bring those up, his father's like, no, I think that's a great example.
His father's probably praying for him.
Yeah.
And even those, now, you said, have some people been hostile to you with your Christianity? Like in the sense of, I'm not going to do that, and they kind of give you a hard time? Or has there been anything like that?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Not too much,
That's
but
good.
there's a few people.
Yeah.
And yet we're called to pray for those people.
Yes.
That's bizarre. Jesus talking specifically about even harsher persecution says, you're supposed to love your enemies. Jesus said, you've heard it, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, amazing authority of Jesus, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's easier
said than done.
Yes.
I have found it in my own life that it is much harder for me to hate and badmouth people whom I'm praying for. Because if I'm constantly praying for Kassie here in your life, and when Kassie makes a mistake, or if Kassie sins against Caleb, I'm probably going to have the reaction of, how dare she, if I'm not thinking about the way more important relationship with, if I'm not praying for you.
And just hold that grudge against it too. Yeah.
I think prayer, if we're praying, I think that'll result in what you're talking about, in forgiveness, no bitterness. Because if your aunt and uncle are sitting around being like, I can't just mad at you the whole time. If I'm sure they were sad and wondering why, but if it was just bitterness of Kassie is this and she's so dumb and just like I forget her kind of mindset. When you come back, it's going to be like the well, like look who decided to show up. It's Jesus talks about that with what's the parable? The one who's forgiven himself, and then when he has a debt, he does not forgive the other person. He comes to them, and that's what with religious church-going people where we can end up in danger is when we act like we have nothing to be forgiven of. And
yeah, you're right. You're right.
That's a huge problem. Jesus said, and also right here, I got it right in front of me, Matthew, where is it? 6:14. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. It's a 1-for-1. It's just super plain and understanding. How have you been able? So, I guess I would answer the question. You can elaborate on it, but being forgiven yourself, right? How has that enabled you to forgive others?
Oh, well, just, I guess, following my aunt and uncle's example, just forgiving and understanding, listening, just being that example to others. Just how they've shown their love and forgiveness to me, how God shows his love and forgiveness to us is how I want to show it to others.
It's a good way to explain it to those.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
It cracks me up when, after Jesus talked about the parable of the unforgiving servant I was just alluding to, Peter asked Jesus, hey, how often am I supposed to forgive my brother who sins against me? How many times? That's the famous statement in Matthew 18:22. Jesus says, I do not say to you 7 times, because in Hebrew culture, 7's like the perfect number.
Yeah.
After 7, it's like, all right, like we've gone down. It's not 7 times, but he just exaggerates it to 77 times.
Yeah.
Which is basically, it's not literally count out 77 times. Like, Kassie, that's 78, you're done. That's not how it works at all. He's just saying, it's the Matthew 6 principle.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to forgive others if you've been forgiven.
Just kind of often as they mess up is as often as you need to forgive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And obviously it doesn't condone any, like in John 8, we have the recording of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. He forgives her. And then the statement is, in his love, wanting the better life, like you were saying, I knew there's something much better than this, craving day in and day out that's not satisfying. Jesus tells the woman simply go and sin no more.
Yep.
And that's how it goes. So praying and forgiving, I think, goes hand in hand when we're dealing with someone who's living the prodigal lifestyle, how we can welcome them back, as well as you've been talking about, your lost people, whether they're parents or friends or whatnot, to pray and forgive them. And even if they're not a believer and they see you forgiving them when they've wronged you, and I think it's Romans 12, when you're not retaliating, when you're not repaying evil for evil, that's going to make people stop and at least consider your lifestyle. You have something to say, George?
No, I think that's really good, and it kind of full circles back to the original reason why we cried out to God in the first place, because we found satisfaction in Him, and a satisfying our soul of the thirst that it had.
Yeah, this is a weird question, so we'll get a pause. But how is God? You don't have to get into weird details. Like, how is God more satisfying than anything else? How is that the case? What makes him, as he said to the Samaritan woman in John 4, the living waters, you'll never thirst again. How do you think that's been possible? How is that the case? That's a weird question.
It's a weird question. It's a hard question.
It is a hard question. And I get it. There's probably something supernatural, like spirit to it. I get that. But like, just in your own life, how has this life been more satisfying than the former?
I feel like it's more just because of all the love that I have. And it's from different people. It's not just from my family who, they always say, no matter what you do, we're going to love you. But it's from other Christians and people that I know and grow up around and just more involved in, who have that same feeling, no matter what you do, we're still going to love you.
Yeah.
And having that support, I feel like it feels a lot more than before.
Yeah.
Just,
And before it was like you had friends before, worldly friends.
yes.
But they were driving you, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but they were driving you to a place where it was enough was never enough. I have to do it. Is that what it, right? Again?
About that way, yeah.
How would you describe it?
Just enough is never enough, and just trying to fill a void that could never be filled that way or with those things.
Sure.
So.
A lot of this, I don't know where we are in time, but a lot of this, I'm picturing the word patience in my mind. There is patience for those who wait on us when we're living the prodigal life. And there's patience we got to have for those who are doing that, or like the influences. You still have family and friends who aren't living the Christian life. And I'm sure sometimes that can be aggravating.
It's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But I like what you said a few minutes ago, that you said, look, if God had forgiven me, then surely, me not being God, then surely I can forgive others. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 1:16, I like this. He says, but I received mercy for this reason, that in me, as the foremost, Jesus Christ might display his perfect patience as an example to those who are to believe in him for eternal life. You think about the many times that we sin, and day in and day out, the sun still came up on our lives, that God would wait for so long. I mean, it makes me think of Israel.
I think one of the biggest things I found when it comes to patience is not so much that we just sit and wait, as how much patience has to do with actually working.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting, we're getting everything prepared. We're tilling to our, I don't know what the proper crop name is, but we're working on the field, waiting for that crop, waiting for that harvest. And we're still working it, just waiting while we're doing it. We're preparing ourselves.
Yeah, so true. All right, so let's wrap it up here.
Yeah.
Generically speaking, what would be your advice to those who might be struggling in whatever their temptations may be, trying to get back on that narrow way? What would just be your generic encouraging statement to them?
I guess it would be if you know somebody who's always there for you and has reached out to you, just reach out to them, see what's worked for them, and hopefully they're a Christian, and that that's the life that's their influence that they're trying to impose on you, and that's what they're trying to help you see, that's working for them, that they want for you. And hopefully that leads you to that life that you're wanting to get to, that change.
A lot what I've been hearing from you has been the influence and love from God's people, from his church. We are very often you can feel God's love. I'm sure you have at times reading the Bible. But if no one's bringing the Bible into life, there's going to be a little disconnect there. At the very least, you're going to be a lonely Christian. At the worst, you're not going to be a Christian at all.
Yeah.
But very often, we are the agents of God's will. We just did our last podcast was doing on the Yahweh, the name of God, that he is. God just is. And it was kind of hitting us that, it's interesting and funny almost that God uses people. Because God being God could, snap his fingers, so to say, and everything's like fixed or whatnot. It's like, why would he use his people? And I think it's, he's teaching all of us these wonderful lessons that we want to get, if you were spoon-fed, so to say. Yeah. Really impress upon me the love that is needed from God's people to the broken. If we don't realize that, then then you got to start asking about your own status before God if we cannot receive those people. George, you pulling up a verse there?
I was looking for one, but
what were you looking for?
I'm lost.
Give me the G5 paraphrase.
The G5 paraphrase. Well, I couldn't remember. I had to get in and get there. But I remember when Elijah was. You probably know this more. This is in Kings 18 when Elijah says, "I'm all alone," and he feels all alone. But there's actually more that he doesn't realize that
Yeah,
are faithful.
he doesn't know about the other prophets.
Yeah, it's important that we are that example, and like you were saying, Cassie, finding that example so that we can see, what we need to be doing and dive into his word.
Yeah.
Because his word is going to satisfy us as well, show us the right way.
And I think to introduce people into the Bible and try to get them into it, a way that I did it was children's stories.
Oh, yeah.
Or even somebody was handing me a Bible verse and say, hey, you should read this. I think this pertains to you in some form or fashion.
That's nice.
And that's where I just dove into the Bible and started reading all the stories. And, if somebody were to hand me a Bible verse, I'd look more into it. It's like, this does relate to me. That's how I got so close with Luke 15. It's like, this does kind of connect to me
and
on a
people
different
just telling
way.
you, hey, go check out this passage or whatnot. That's so simple.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
so simple. It just takes the care to reach out
Yes.
Yeah.
and just share it. Well, I think that's a wrap.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on
Yeah.
and sharing a really powerful story. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Nope, I'm good.
Cassie's signing off. She's signing off.
I'm out.
Hey, thank you very much.
Yeah,
People always
appreciate it.
appreciate this. It's at the very least, and I know it will do more than that. It's certainly encouraged myself. I'm sure it's encouraged you, George.
Yes.
And it'll encourage others. That's what the church is for.
Yes.
And we want to thank you guys for listening. And if you are listening or watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Give us 5 stars if you like what you're listening to. We appreciate all your support. Remember to like, share, and comment wherever you are. And I think that you go so.
Yeah, there it is. Go so.
Go so.
Y'all have a good day.